lawyers feel like I'm going to be like the one that signs up all the cases. Like I'm Harvey Specter. Like I need to be the one that gets on the phone. And in one way, I could see that, right? Like, of course, talking to a lawyer is going to be more beneficial in some ways. Like I could see why that would be super helpful, right? But on the other end, I'm like, but wouldn't your time be best spent doing something else, like prepping for trial or managing the business? And I think that there is this belief in our space, especially when law firms are like in their, first few years, that the lawyer has to be the one to do the intake and be involved in the intake. And what is an intake specialist going to do? Some lawyers will be like, wait, they're going to sign up the case. They're going to determine if this is a case or not. And how do you feel about that? And then I guess the follow-up question would be, what about, is there a time that is appropriate to say, let me transfer you to one of our lawyers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all boils down to availability. So if you are a lawyer and you just are available to screen cases that you want and do not want all day long, and you're able to also keep up with other things, which means that we're not letting people off the phone, right, to take a message, to have a lawyer call them back.
Oh, yes.
That's where we see the bottleneck.
I literally hear this, like, even when we're like monitoring LSA calls, right? And we're like listening and notating. And I will tell the team, like, okay, well, how many of these ended up in signups? And they'll be like, well, there's no way for me to know because it's always like, I'll have a lawyer call you back. And I'm like, what? I'm like, put me on an email thread. Like, I'm just like, that should not be happening. Right? It's like, if they're not available, then just sign up the case. If you need to reject it later, reject it. How is the intake team not trained on what cases to sign up and which cases to not sign up, right? But getting through to the lawyers, sometimes, I don't know if you struggle with this, especially I would argue with like the newer or more boutique firms, that I personally think there's like some limiting beliefs around it. Like nobody else is going to be able to do this as well as me. I'm needed for this. And I'm like, well, I mean, how does Morgan and Morgan do it? Like,
I think that it comes from lawyers feeling like they have to be involved in their intake process. I think it's coming from a place of wanting what's best for their clients. They truly believe that I am the only person that can, qualify this case and really ask the questions that are necessary. My intake team isn't trained on that. I don't have time to train them on this. And it just becomes this cycle, right? I don't have time to train them on this. I need help. I'm probably losing cases because I'm having to call them back, and then they've hired another attorney. And until I can spend the time to train them, I'm just going to have to continue to take these intakes myself. And it's just it's a vicious cycle. There's no freedom.
And I think the other component to add, a lot of lawyers, at least the lawyers that we work with, are trial lawyers, right? So they are used to getting these very warm leads, right? But the moment they start doing any sort of marketing, I'm like, the marketing cold lead isn't going to wait for your call back. They are just not going to wait for your call back. So I think it's also like, and do you guys factor that when you're auditing intake? Do you factor in that not all leads are created equal? Right? And like, how is that addressed?
I want to just go back and finish answering the other question for lawyers listening to this and wondering, can there ever be a future where I'm not stuck doing an intake call on a Saturday instead of spending time with my family? Yes. You have to invest in either a resource to train your intake team. They can learn how to approach a call with the empathy that's necessary, how to identify a viable case, a valuable case for all of your case types. And they're going to do a better job at following up with that lead because they'll be solely responsible for doing that. So it can happen. I just want any lawyer to listen to this to know that that freedom is possible for their firm. And with that comes growth because you have someone that is available to actually nurture those leads that you've invested to attract into your firm. The goal is to try to create a standard and a process for everything. If there's a trend where let's say that, if it's not clear, if your intake team doesn't have a clear criteria of when to sign up a car accident case, take the time to document that, right? Or work with someone that can help you do that. And with a car accident case, I am under the strong belief that an intake team should be able to identify that case and sign them up without bringing in a lawyer. When it comes to another type of case where maybe there are nuances like a premises liability, what I like to do, and someone internally, right, that's not working with us can do this as well, is take the time to go through a premises liability case so that you interview the attorney and you bring the attorney. These are the leads that you signed up. These are the leads that you rejected. Why did you reject this lead? Also, if an attorney is responding in response to a lead that was sent with additional questions, just add those questions to the intake questionnaire. That's important information that can be asked during the intake process. And the goal is to build out your intake process so much that the attorney can just make a decision should they have to be involved. If they have to be involved, that indicates that perhaps there is an opportunity to document the criteria for this so that the intake team can handle this case. So what we do is, and sometimes it takes 1, 2, or 3 sessions where we sit down with the attorney and we truly understand all of the information that they need. And now that you have this information, what do you consider a weak case? What do you consider a really strong case and why? So we just dig and dig and we probe and then we document the criteria for the intake team so that they have a roadmap of this is a clear sign up. We might reject it later, but this is one that they will feel really good about if you don't let pass. Right. And this is what they consider a weak case. It's okay for you to bring in an attorney just in case there's maybe some nuances that they'll be able to discover. But you want to get as close as possible. And then, of course, you have your med mals.
If I were a law firm and you know you're going to get X amount, if you're lucky, of 7, 8-figure cases, if it's like a catastrophic truck accident and you know the trucking company, you know that there's going to already be a minimum policy of millions, like, is it like, hey, we have a really fucking hot lead. Like, I need an attorney that can ideally also sign up cases. Because I think that that's like another, I don't want anyone to get mad at me. I know all of you think you're like the best at signing up cases, but I do think there are lawyers that are better at it than others.
Yeah.
I've even heard some that I think the lawyers can be kind of rude and condescending. And I'm like,
yes,
struggling because
they're busy, which is why you should have an intake team.
Okay, yes. But now typically I hear this when like people don't actually have a case, right? Believe it or not, is when I hear more. And I'm like, oh, that was the chance for a review. Explain to them why they don't have a case. Be friendly. Get me that review. But that's a whole conversation for another day. Is there a point where it's like, if this magic criteria hits, we involve a lawyer? Or do you think, no, the intake team should be the best at closing it? They should have examples of results of cases that have been gone to trial. Should they explain, if there's a trial firm, should they explain the difference between a settlement firm or, a pre-litigation firm and a firm that actually goes to trial? Because this is something I hear a lot from lawyers, right? Like, we actually go to trial and they're so proud of it. And I'm like, how proud you are. Like, I want to hear your intake be that proud and explain to the average consumer, like, they don't understand the difference between you and a big advertiser that you claim doesn't go to trial. Because I'm not trying to put down big advertisers either. I think that's a super hard job, right? And I'm all about marketing, so like kudos to them. But what I hear from the trial lawyer is all these people ranking, or not all, but A, B, C, and D, and this big, they don't go to trial. Okay. Is that passion coming through? And I know where I'm always like,
no, I'm keeping up with the questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's all kind of flows, right?
Yes.
So let's just go back. Is there a point when the lawyer has to be brought back in?
So we establish what we call like an escalation policy.
Okay.
So all prospects, all potential injured people should be given the same level of service, but there are some that we escalate, which means that intake specialist is going to actually cover their same call path as they would with any other viable claim, which actually includes things like establishing the value propositions of the fact that perhaps we are trial attorneys, right? And that we have this experience, or maybe we have attorneys that have practice on the defense side and they understand, right? And then they have that intel knowledge. All of that is already being sprinkled throughout the call, right? If the intake specialist is applying that.
Which I would argue is sales.
Yes. So if there is a case where there is like an overnight hospitalization involved, right, or TBI injury, not only So the conversion or the ask is different. It's when can we come to you?
Right.
When can we come to the
Yep.
hospital? So they're still expected to have that same level of gusto when it comes to making the close, but the close means when's the appointment, when's visiting schedule. They're still explaining how everything works, but they're giving them VIP service. So they're still expected to follow that. They're not going to stop what they're doing, look for an attorney. Maybe they're busy and then have to call that person back. They're just sending it off. It's in motion. There's nothing to think about. Put it on the attorney's calendar and get it scheduled. And the attorneys all have that expectation. They would be more than happy on a weekend
Right.
to,
Oh, I'm sure.
to attend that. Just put it on their schedule. So we have an escalation policy that's about the level of urgency of when you can just sign it up versus sign it up, schedule an appointment, and get the ball rolling immediately.